The engagement hall shimmered like something taken from a magazine spread, crystal chandeliers dripping with light, ivory tablecloths stretched smooth as untouched snow, soft gold accents catching every movement. Laughter floated easily through the air, rehearsed and comfortable, the kind that belonged to people who felt safe in their place. I stood near the far wall, half hidden by a sheer curtain, watching it all from a distance. Everyone else wore colors meant to celebrate. Pastels. Creams. Soft blues and blush pinks. Dresses that whispered joy, happiness, belonging. I wore black. Not because I was sad. Not because I wanted attention. But because black never lies. My dress was simple, fitted, unadorned. No sparkle. No apology. It wrapped around me like a quiet declaration, I am here, but I owe no one an explanation. The fabric felt steady against my skin, grounding me in a room that had never truly felt like mine. People noticed, of course. They always do. Eyes lingered a second too long. Whispers slipped between smiles. I caught fragments as I passed. Is she always like this? Why black at an engagement? She hasn't changed. They were wrong. I had changed. That was the problem. Across the room, my sister Lily glowed under the lights, her laughter ringing like a bell that everyone rushed toward. Her engagement ring flashed as she lifted her hand again and again, accepting congratulations, admiration, envy. She fit this moment perfectly. Like the night had been designed around her. And then there was me. The daughter who never quite blended into the picture. My parents moved through the crowd with practiced ease, smiling until their cheeks must have ached. My mother adjusted decorations that were already perfect. My father laughed louder than necessary, his voice filling spaces where silence threatened to creep in. I recognized those signs. They were nervous. I wondered briefly if they felt it too, the subtle shift in the air, like something unspoken pressing against the room, waiting for the right moment to surface. Or maybe that feeling belonged only to me, the weight of years sitting quietly on my shoulders. I sipped my drink slowly, watching reflections ripple across the glass. I wasn't lonely. I wasn't bitter. I was observant. This family had taught me that survival didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes, it meant standing still long enough to see the truth reveal itself. As the music softened and the crowd rearranged itself, I felt it, that familiar sense of being both present and invisible. The girl in black. The one people didn't know what to do with. The one whose story didn't fit neatly into celebration speeches and smiling photographs. I didn't know yet that this night would change everything. But somewhere deep inside, I felt it. Because silence like this never lasts forever. From my place near the edge of the hall, I watched my family perform. That was the only word for it, perform. My mother floated from table to table, her smile flawless, her posture perfect, fingers constantly adjusting things that didn't need fixing. A centerpiece shifted half an inch. A napkin straightened. A wine glass rotated just so. Anyone watching would think she was simply a devoted host. I knew better. She was nervous. My father stood near the center of the room, laughing loudly at jokes that weren't funny, clapping people on the back a little too hard. He kept his shoulders squared, chest out, like a man defending territory. His eyes scanned the room again and again, not searching for joy, but for control. They were afraid of something going wrong. They always were. I had grown up learning that in this family, appearances mattered more than truth. As long as everything looked perfect, no one asked questions. And if questions came too close to the truth, they were smothered with laughter, food, or silence. Especially silence. My sister Lily didn't notice any of it. She was too busy being celebrated. People orbited her like she was the sun, friends, relatives, strangers who only knew her name because tonight demanded admiration. She laughed easily, touching her ring, tilting her head just right. She belonged here. I wondered if she even noticed how our parents hovered, how my mother's eyes flicked toward me every few minutes, How my father stiffened whenever someone new joined our table. I doubted it. I had always been good at noticing what others ignored. A cousin approached me, drink in hand. "You look serious," she said lightly. "I'm just watching," I replied. She nodded, uncomfortable, then drifted away, back to the warmth of people who didn't ask uncomfortable questions. I didn't follow. I had learned long ago that standing slightly apart gave you a better view of the truth. From here, I could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. A brief argument between my parents near the buffet, voices low, smiles frozen. My mother's hand tightening around my father's arm a second too long. His jaw clenching before he laughed again. Something was coming. They felt it too. This engagement party wasn't just a celebration. It was a balancing act. One wrong word. One unexpected topic. One person asking the wrong question, and the carefully built illusion could collapse. I caught my mother looking at me again. This time, her smile didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't worried about Lily. She wasn't worried about the guests. She was worried about me. And the things I represented without ever saying a word. I met her gaze calmly. No challenge. No apology. Just truth. She turned away quickly. That's when I understood, tonight wasn't fragile because of what might be said. It was fragile because of what had already happened. And the past, no matter how deeply buried, always finds a way to surface, especially in rooms full of light, laughter, and pretending. The doors of the engagement hall opened quietly, but the shift in the room was instant. I felt it before I saw him. The laughter dipped for half a second. Conversation stumbled. Even the music seemed to hesitate, like it sensed something entering that didn't belong to rehearsed joy. Uncle James had arrived. He wasn't loud. He didn't command attention with grand gestures or booming greetings. He simply walked in. Tall, composed, eyes sharp with the kind of calm that comes from knowing more than you say. He scanned the room once. Not searching for faces. Reading them. My mother noticed him immediately. Her hand froze mid-gesture as she adjusted a floral arrangement. My father's smile faltered, then snapped back into place like a mask being yanked up too fast. They hadn't expected him. Of course they hadn't. Uncle James was the one person who never accepted half-truths. The one relative who asked follow-up questions. The one who remembered details everyone else preferred to forget. He greeted a few people politely, exchanged brief handshakes, light nods. No wasted words. No fake warmth. Every step he took felt deliberate, like he already knew where this night was heading. Then his eyes found me. The girl in black. I hadn't moved from my place near the edge of the room, but suddenly it felt like the distance between us vanished. His gaze softened, not with pity, not with surprise, but recognition. He walked straight toward me. "You look strong," he said quietly when he reached me. Not "you look nice." Not "you've grown." Strong. The word settled heavily between us. I met his eyes and nodded once. "I am." Behind him, I saw my parents watching, too closely. My mother's fingers twisted together. My father's jaw tightened, the way it always did when he felt exposed. Uncle James followed my gaze and smiled faintly. "They still carry tension the same way," he murmured. "Like people guarding a locked door." I said nothing. There was no need. He took a glass from a passing tray but didn't drink. Instead, he looked around the room again, slower this time. His eyes paused on Lily, glowing in the center of attention. Then back to my parents. Then back to me. "You didn't change your colors," he said, glancing at my black dress. "No," I replied. I stopped pretending. That earned a quiet chuckle from him, short, knowing. Across the hall, my mother leaned toward my father, whispering urgently. He shook his head, pretending to laugh at something someone else said, but his eyes never left Uncle James. They were afraid. Not of drama. Big night. Yes, I answered. It is. His lips curved slightly. These nights tend to bring things out. Before I could respond, someone announced dinner. The room exhaled. Chairs scraped. People shifted. The illusion of control returned, for now. Uncle James offered me his arm. Shall we? He asked. As we moved toward the table, I felt it clearly, the calm before impact. Because when a man like Uncle James asks questions, it's never by accident. And this family had too many answers they didn't want spoken aloud. Dinner settled over the hall like a carefully placed blanket. Plates were filled. Glasses clinked softly. Conversations restarted in cautious tones, as if everyone sensed the night had teeth but didn't yet know where they would bite. The earlier laughter returned, but thinner now, stretched tight over something fragile. I sat quietly at the long table, my black dress a stark contrast against the white linen. Uncle James took the seat beside me. My parents sat across, close enough for me to see every twitch, every forced smile. My sister Lily sat at the center, glowing again, though her movements were slightly stiff, like she was posing for a photograph she couldn't step out of. Uncle James ate slowly. Deliberately. He listened more than he spoke, nodding politely, his eyes moving from face to face. He wasn't enjoying the food. He was waiting. My mother leaned toward him, voice light. James, we're so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it, he replied calmly. My father laughed. Big night for the family. Yes, Uncle James said, setting his fork down. For the family. Something in the way he repeated the words made my mother's hand tremble. She lifted her glass quickly, took a sip she didn't need. A pause followed. Not awkward, intentional. Then Uncle James cleared his throat. So, he said casually, as if asking about the weather, how's the $1.5 million house these days? The sound of cutlery stopped midair. Someone across the table let out a sharp breath. A glass clinked, then fell silent. The music kept playing, oblivious, but the space around us collapsed into stillness. My parents froze. My mother's face drained of color so fast it was almost frightening. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. My father didn't move at all, his eyes locked on Uncle James, wide, calculating, panicked. Lily turned toward me slowly. What house? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Every eye at the table, and then in the room, shifted to me. I felt none of the panic burning across their faces. Only clarity. I took my time lifting my glass. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unavoidable. This moment had been building for years, whether they liked it or not. It's peaceful, I said calmly. Quiet. Exactly how I wanted it. A wave of murmurs rippled outward like a stone dropped into water. My sister stared at me, stunned. You want a house like that? My parents said nothing. They couldn't. Because this was the truth they never planned to explain. My mother finally found her voice, thin and strained. James, this isn't the time. Uncle James didn't look at her. His gaze stayed on me, steady and unapologetic. I disagree, he said softly. I think it's exactly the time. My father's jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. The room had shifted now, fully aware. No one was eating. No one was smiling. The engagement party had stopped being a celebration and turned into something far more dangerous. A reckoning. I set my glass down gently. The girl in black didn't flinch. Because when silence is broken at last, it doesn't shatter the strong. It exposes the ones who were pretending all along. The silence didn't break. It thickened. It wrapped itself around the table, crawling into every corner of the room, pressing against chests, stealing breath. The kind of silence that doesn't come from confusion, but from fear. My parents still hadn't spoken. My mother stared down at her plate as if the answers might be written there, her fingers gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles had turned white. My father's shoulders were rigid, his eyes fixed somewhere past Uncle James, past me. Anywhere but the truth now sitting between us. They weren't shocked. They were exposed. I could see it clearly now, the reason they had worked so hard to keep me at the edges of this night. Why they watched me more than the guests. Why my mother's smile kept breaking. Because the house didn't just represent money. It represented failure. Years ago, when I had nothing but ambition and a fragile belief in fairness, I had asked them for help. Not money, just support. Guidance. A place to stand while I built something of my own. They said no. Not because they couldn't help, but because helping me didn't fit the story they wanted to tell the world. They invested in Lily. In appearances. In futures that reflected well on them. And I learned. I learned how to be quiet. How to work without praise. How to survive without approval. I learned that when doors don't open, you build your own. That house was proof that I didn't need them. And that terrified them more than any accusation ever could. My sister shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her joy unraveling thread by thread. Why didn't I know? She asked, her voice shaking, not with anger, but disbelief. I met her eyes. Because no one asked. My mother finally looked up then. Her eyes were glassy, pleading. We just didn't think it was necessary to share everything. Uncle James leaned back slightly. Selective silence, he said. A family tradition. My father inhaled sharply. Enough, he snapped, too quickly. Too loudly. That single word confirmed everything. He wasn't angry at Uncle James. He was angry that the truth had slipped out before he could control it. The guests had gone quiet now, pretending not to listen while catching every word. Heads tilted. Ears strained. Judgments forming. My parents had built their image carefully over decades. And in one moment, it cracked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Because the strongest evidence stood without explanation. A daughter they underestimated. A success they didn't sponsor. A truth they couldn't erase. My mother reached for my hand across the table, desperate. I gently pulled back. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. Silence had protected them for years. Tonight, it betrayed them. And everyone could finally see why. For the first time that night, I didn't just exist in the room. I claimed it. The silence still hovered over the table, thick and expectant, but now it wasn't pressing on me, it was waiting for me. I could feel every pair of eyes leaning in, measuring me, trying to decide whether I was about to cause a scene. I wasn't. I had learned long ago that raised voices are for people who need to be heard. I already was. I folded my hands calmly on the table, the black fabric of my dress steady against my skin. When I spoke, my voice didn't tremble. It didn't rush. It didn't apologize. I didn't plan to talk about this tonight, I said evenly. But since it's been mentioned, I'll be clear. My mother swallowed hard. My father didn't blink. I built my life quietly, I continued. Not because I was hiding, but because I wasn't waiting for permission. A murmur rippled through the guests. I ignored it. I worked while others were celebrated. I saved while others were supported. I failed more times than anyone here knows, and I did it alone. My sister's eyes filled with something I hadn't seen before. Understanding. Uncle James watched without interruption, his expression unreadable, respectful. I didn't buy that house to prove anything, I said. I bought it because I needed a place where I didn't feel like a disappointment. That landed. My mother's breath hitched. My father finally looked at me, really looked. Not as the child who didn't fit, but as the woman who had surpassed expectations they never believed she could meet. I don't resent my family, I added softly. Resentment is heavy. I learned to travel light. The room was completely silent now. No whispering. No clinking glasses. No pretending. I wear black, I said, glancing down briefly, because it reminds me who I became when no one was watching. I lifted my gaze. And I'm proud of her. No anger. No accusation. Just truth, spoken once and without regret. When I finished, I leaned back slightly, signaling I was done. I didn't need applause. Because the power wasn't in how loudly I spoke. It was in the fact that after years of silence, I finally chose to. The room faded away, not in reality, but in memory. As I sat there in my black dress, calm on the surface, my mind slipped backward through time, to the years when silence wasn't a choice, it was survival. I had been the quiet child. Not difficult. Not rebellious. Just convenient to overlook. Lily had always needed more attention, more reassurance, more celebration. Her achievements were framed and hung proudly. Her failures were softened, excused, understood. Mine were acknowledged with nods. Sometimes not even that. I learned early that asking for things made people uncomfortable. So I stopped. I learned how to solve problems on my own, how to keep disappointment from showing on my face. I became self-sufficient long before anyone noticed. At family gatherings, I was the one sent to help in the kitchen. The one trusted to understand. The one told, "You're strong, you don't need as much." They meant it as praise. It was a sentence. I remember the day I got my first acceptance letter. A good school. A real chance. I stood in the doorway holding the envelope, heart pounding, waiting for someone to look up. My mother smiled briefly. "That's nice," she said. My father nodded. "We'll talk about it later." Later never came. The money went somewhere else. Always did. I worked instead. Nights. Weekends. Summers. I watched Lily leave for opportunities funded by encouragement and checks I never saw. No one asked how I felt. They assumed I'd manage. And I did. But managing and being loved are not the same thing. The night I left home, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No slammed doors. Just quiet words and firm decisions. I was told it was time to be independent, as if I hadn't already been for years. I packed what fit in a single suitcase. No one stopped me. That was the moment I understood my place in the family story. I wasn't the centerpiece. I was the background. And backgrounds don't complain. They don't ask for credit. They just exist, holding everything else together while being unseen. Those years shaped me. They stripped away entitlement, illusion, expectation. They left me with something harder, but stronger. Self-belief built from necessity. As the memory faded, the engagement hall came back into focus. The lights. The faces. The silence. I realized something then. The forgotten daughter didn't disappear. She grew. And tonight, for the first time, everyone else was finally being asked to remember her. Some moments don't announce themselves. They arrive quietly, without music or warning, and only later do you realize your life has been split into before and after. That night was one of them. I was 22. Young enough to still believe effort would be rewarded. Old enough to feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me from every direction. I had been working 2 jobs then, one that paid the bills, another that fed a future I wasn't sure I was allowed to want. I remember standing in the living room of my parents' house, exhaustion clinging to me like a second skin. The walls felt smaller than they used to. The air heavier. My father spoke first. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. He told me the family needed help. That money was tight. That sacrifices had to be made. He said it like a fact, not a request. I asked how much. When he named the number, my stomach dropped. It was nearly everything I had saved. Years of discipline. Missed dinners. Sleepless nights. Every private hope I had poured into a future that finally felt within reach. I hesitated. That was my mistake. My mother's expression changed instantly. Not anger, disappointment. As if I had failed a test I didn't know I was taking. You're not using it for anything important, she said gently. You can start over. But I knew the truth. If I gave them that money, there would never be a start over. I said no. Just one word. Calm. Respectful. The room went cold. My father's jaw tightened. He told me I was being selfish. Ungrateful. That family came before individual dreams. I asked, quietly, why my sister wasn't being asked. No one answered. That silence told me everything. The conversation ended without shouting, but the damage was done. I was no longer a daughter in need of guidance. I was a problem. That night, I packed my suitcase. The same one I had used for college trips and short visits, never imagining it would carry my exit. No one tried to stop me. No one followed me to the door. As I stepped outside, the air felt different. Sharper. Colder. Real. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Because when you walk away with nothing but yourself, you either break, or you build something stronger than you ever thought possible. And I chose to build. The house didn't come quickly. It wasn't luck. It wasn't inheritance. It wasn't a sudden miracle that turned everything around. It came slowly, brick by brick, failure by failure, lesson by lesson. After I left, I lived in places that never felt permanent. Small apartments with thin walls. Rooms where the heater barely worked in winter and the silence echoed too loudly at night. I learned how to stretch meals, how to choose between rest and progress, how to keep moving even when no one was watching. I worked constantly. Not just to survive, but to prove something to myself. There were days I questioned everything. Nights when I sat on the floor, back against the wall, wondering if independence was just another word for loneliness. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself why I had left. Freedom always costs something. I learned new skills. Took risks that terrified me. Failed publicly and recovered privately. Each setback sharpened me instead of breaking me. Slowly, opportunity began to recognize effort. Money followed discipline. When I bought my first small property, I didn't tell anyone. Not out of secrecy, but because the victory felt sacred. I needed to own it fully before sharing it with the world. Then came the real house. The one people whispered about now. It stood in a quiet neighborhood, framed by tall trees and long mornings. Wide windows. Solid doors. A foundation that didn't creak under pressure. The first night I slept there, I lay awake listening, not to noise, but to peace. That house wasn't about luxury. It was about safety. It was about safety. It was the first place I could breathe without bracing myself for disappointment. Every room held meaning. The kitchen where I cooked meals without rushing. The living space where silence felt like rest, not rejection. The bedroom where I closed the door knowing no one could tell me I didn't belong. I paid for it myself. No cosigners. No family contributions. No favors. Just years of work no one applauded. So when Uncle James mentioned the price at the table, it wasn't pride I felt. It was completion. Because that house wasn't just a property. It was proof that I could build a life without permission, and still build it well. And that was the truth my parents were never ready to face. The engagement hall seemed different now. Not because the lights had dimmed, they hadn't, but because the room itself had shifted. Every laugh, every conversation, carried a new weight. The air was charged with awareness. I returned to the table after speaking my truth. My black dress stood out sharply against the pastel sea of guests, but I felt no need to hide. I didn't need anyone to notice me. I simply existed, confident, grounded, untouchable. Whispers began almost immediately. She owns a $1. $5 million house? By herself? Why didn't we know? Eyes darted between me and my parents. My mother's hand trembled as she lifted her glass. My father's jaw was clenched so tightly it looked painful. I didn't look at them. I didn't have to. Their discomfort spoke volumes. Across the table, Lily's smile faltered. For the first time that night, she wasn't the center of attention without question. Her cheeks flushed, not from excitement or embarrassment, but something heavier. Confusion, maybe even a flicker of jealousy. Uncle James leaned back, observing the reactions with that calm, piercing gaze of his. He knew exactly what he had done. Not by intention, but by asking the right question at the right time. The guests shifted in their seats. Some tried to return to polite conversation, but it was useless. The air hummed with tension. People were aware that this night, their carefully rehearsed evening of celebration, was no longer entirely theirs. I remained composed. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain further. I simply let the truth settle over them like a fine dust, unseen but impossible to ignore. The music played on, but every note seemed to echo my presence. The chandelier lights reflected in polished glass, in the surprised eyes of family, in the hesitant smiles of friends who weren't sure what they had walked into. I noticed my mother glance at me, her lips parting as if she had something to say. She stopped. She swallowed. No words came. My father stared. His shoulders tightened. The pride, the shame, the fear, all of it visible in one rigid posture. And in the center of it all, I realized something. I no longer needed them to acknowledge me. My existence, my success, my voice, they could tremble under scrutiny if they wanted, but it would not affect me. The girl in black was no longer invisible. She had returned not just to the party, but to the world that had ignored her for too long. And in that room full of celebration, admiration, and envy, I felt it clearly, power wasn't in the house, or the money, or even the words. Power was in choosing when to speak, and when to let silence speak for itself. Lily approached me slowly, the golden light of the chandeliers catching her engagement ring and casting tiny reflections across the floor. Her usual confidence was cracked, like a perfectly polished vase with a hidden fracture. You never told me," she said, voice low, trembling somewhere between disbelief and frustration. Her words weren't angry, but they carried weight, an unspoken accusation, the quiet sting of being left behind. I studied her carefully. Not with judgment, not with malice. Just clarity. "You never asked," I replied evenly. My tone wasn't harsh, but it landed firmly. There was no sugarcoating, no easing of the truth. Her eyes darted away briefly, then back to mine. I saw the shift, confusion, surprise, and a flicker of envy that had never been there before. She had spent years being the center of attention, the one everyone praised, the one the family celebrated. And here I was, standing beside her, calm, self-assured, and holding something she had never imagined, independence. "Why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, almost to herself. I shook my head slightly. "Because no one thought it mattered. Because you had your life, and I had mine. And no one ever considered that I would build something for myself." Her smile faltered, small and tight, curling at the edges like it was trying to appear polite but failing. That was the smile of someone realizing the ground beneath them had shifted. "You've changed," she said finally, eyes flicking toward Uncle James, then to our parents, then back at me. "I didn't expect this." "No one did," I said softly. "But that's the way life works. People notice what they want to, ignore what they don't, and sometimes, by the time they pay attention, it's already too late to define me." She leaned back slightly, the distance between us growing even as we stayed near. I could feel the tension, the mix of admiration, guilt, and jealousy swirling around her like a storm. "You always look unbothered," she said quietly. "Even when everything's falling apart." "I learned a long time ago that peace doesn't come from control over others," I said. "It comes from owning yourself." Her gaze softened for a moment, but not completely. I could see the struggle in her eyes. Wanting to be happy for me, wanting to acknowledge my success, but wrestling with the reality that she had never been the one in black. The room continued around us, a blur of laughter, music, and clinking glasses, but for those few seconds, it felt like we were the only two people who existed. Her small, hesitant smile returned, fragile and uneasy. I guess I'm proud of you," she said, almost a whisper, like saying it aloud made it real. I nodded once, simply. That was enough. The truth didn't need celebration tonight. The acknowledgement didn't need ceremony. It only needed to exist. Because the girl in black had claimed her place, quietly, firmly, unshakably. And even my sister, with all her glow and charm, had no choice but to notice. After Lily drifted away, leaving a fragile tension between us, my mother found me standing by the window. The engagement hall buzzed behind her, unaware of the confrontation she was about to face, but I could feel every tremor in her hands, every flicker of emotion in her eyes. She didn't speak at first. Her lips parted, closed, then parted again. I could see the battle inside her, years of control, of polished appearances, of burying feelings, struggling against the raw truth in front of her. Finally, her voice came out, soft and strained, barely audible over the hum of the party. Why now?" she whispered, almost as if asking herself, not me. I turned to face her fully, my black dress a stark contrast to her pale worry. I met her eyes calmly. No accusation. No anger. Just clarity. "You didn't give me a choice," I said. "He did." Her hands shook. She reached out, instinctively, then stopped. She wanted to hold me. To protect me. To scold me. But she didn't know what to do with the woman who had already walked through fire and come out stronger. Her eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. I didn't know how to. "I thought keeping quiet would protect you," she murmured. I softened, but not enough to blur the boundaries I had built over years of self-reliance. Protect me? By pretending I wasn't capable? By leaving me invisible? She shook her head, tears spilling over now, sliding down her cheeks unrestrained. I was wrong. I see that now. I see it. All of it. I took a deep breath. This was not a moment for blame. It was a moment for truth. I don't need protection anymore. I never did. I needed acknowledgement, guidance, maybe even support. But I learned to survive without it. Her shoulders slumped. The weight she had carried, the pride, the fear, the control, seemed to melt, if only slightly, in that quiet corner away from the crowd. She had spent decades trying to control appearances, and now she realized she had no control over the reality in front of her. I didn't know you'd come so far, she whispered. I didn't realize. I never saw. You did see, I said gently. You just chose not to. The words were sharp, but fair. She flinched, swallowed, and then nodded slowly. Acceptance, mixed with regret, entered her eyes for the first time that night. Behind us, the party continued, laughter, clinking glasses, music, but it no longer reached us. This moment belonged to both of us, a private reckoning. Her hand trembled as she touched my arm lightly, a gesture of apology, of recognition, of tentative connection. I am proud of you, she said, voice breaking. I nodded once. That was enough. The girl in black didn't need more. Because the air at the engagement table was taut, thick with silence, with unspoken truths hovering like dust motes in sunlight. I sat quietly, my black dress absorbing the tension, observing the room with a calm born from years of surviving without anyone's approval. Uncle James leaned back slightly, studying everyone. His gaze lingered on my parents, on Lily, then finally returned to me. He didn't speak at first. He didn't need to. Everyone was already listening, waiting for the next word that would break the carefully maintained facade. Finally, he spoke, deliberately, slowly, as if savoring the impact. She bought it herself. A pause. Just a breath. Then he added, softer this time, almost conversational, but each word carried weight like a hammer striking stone. No loans. No cosigners. No family contributions. Every brick, every nail, every window, every door, she earned it herself. Gasps ran across the table. Small murmurs echoed among the guests. Heads turned. Eyes widened. My sister's hand went to her mouth, eyes darting between me and Uncle James, disbelief etched into her features. My mother's lips parted, and her voice caught somewhere in her throat. My father's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table, jaw tight, shoulders rigid. The room had shifted. The engagement party, so carefully orchestrated, now felt like a theater of truth where roles had suddenly been reassigned. Uncle James paused. Let the silence settle over them. He didn't need to point fingers. He didn't need to explain. The truth itself had weight enough to press on the room, heavy and undeniable. Years of work, he continued, his voice calm, precise. Discipline. Sacrifice. Every step alone. She never asked for approval. She never waited for permission. And yet, here she is. Years of work, he continued, his voice calm, precise. Discipline. Sacrifice. Every step alone. She never asked for approval. She never waited for permission. And yet, here she is. I felt a subtle shift in the energy around me. The power I had quietly held for years now radiated into the room. I didn't need to speak again. My story was no longer invisible. It belonged to me, and Uncle James had just reminded everyone of that fact. My parents shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Pride, shame, guilt, they battled across their faces, impossible to mask. For decades, they had measured their family by appearances, by who they favored, by what they celebrated. And in one quiet sentence, Uncle James had undone all of it. I met Uncle James' gaze. He offered the faintest nod, acknowledgement, respect. Not for their reaction, but for me. The room exhaled collectively, but no one laughed, no one clapped. Applause wasn't required. It didn't matter. The revelation itself had drawn a line that could never be erased. Lily's eyes glistened with something unfamiliar, respect, realization, and perhaps envy. My mother's gaze softened for the first time that evening. My father finally looked directly at me, not as the overlooked child, not as the quiet one, but as the woman who had achieved the impossible without their aid. Uncle James finally leaned back, a small, knowing smile on his face. Some truths, he said, almost to himself, are best revealed at the right moment. And in that moment, the girl in black felt the full weight of her journey, from invisible daughter to undeniable force, acknowledged by the one person who always understood what mattered most. The engagement hall continued around us, unaware of the shift, but nothing could undo the truth now on the table. Because once a story is earned, no one can take it away. For the first time that night, my father truly saw me. Not as the quiet child who faded into the background. Not as the one who followed rules and remained unseen. Not as the daughter who could be overlooked without consequence. He saw the woman who had built a life from nothing. The woman who had faced silence, indifference, and doubt, and had emerged stronger. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his glass. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Words that should have come years ago stuck somewhere in his throat. You've grown beyond anything I imagined, he finally whispered, almost to himself. The weight of decades pressed on him. Pride. Guilt. Shame. Regret. All of it collided in that single statement. His shoulders slumped slightly, the armor he had worn for years cracking under the weight of acknowledgement. I remained calm. I didn't reach for forgiveness. I didn't ask for it. I simply watched him face the truth he had long avoided. I failed you, he said, voice trembling now. Not because I didn't love you, but because I didn't know how to see you. I thought keeping you safe meant holding you back. Years of anger, frustration, and silent longing rose in me, but I let them pass. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. It was the moment for clarity. You didn't fail me, I said softly, my voice steady. I learned to stand on my own. That was never your responsibility. His eyes filled with tears, he refused to blink away. I should have noticed sooner, he admitted. I should have been there when you needed guidance, encouragement, even just acknowledgement. And I wasn't. And now? He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. The words were heavy with meaning. He had spent a lifetime measuring success by appearances, by who was praised, by who fit the image of the family. And now he faced someone who had exceeded all expectations, without him. The room around us faded for a moment. Laughter and music continued, but it felt distant, irrelevant. This was a private reckoning between a father and a daughter who had outgrown the space he had tried to contain her in. I'm proud of you, he finally said, voice breaking. Even if I didn't show it before. Even if I was blind to it. I am proud. I nodded once, quietly, letting the weight of the moment settle. That was all I needed. Approval, belated or not, no longer dictated my worth. I had earned my life, and now he finally saw it. He looked at me again, really looked, and I saw a man recognizing the truth too late, a man forced to confront the consequences of underestimating someone he had always loved. The girl in black had claimed her place. The father who had once ignored her had finally acknowledged it. And in that silent exchange, years of unspoken tension, of invisible struggles, of hidden triumphs, began to dissolve, replaced by a fragile, honest understanding. For the first time, the night felt whole. I looked down at my dress, black as midnight, and felt a quiet pride. It wasn't a costume. It wasn't rebellion. It wasn't meant to shock or challenge anyone. It was me. For years, black had been my armor. My shield against indifference, against judgment, against the weight of being invisible in a family that celebrated everyone but me. Every thread carried the lessons I had learned. Every fold whispered the nights I had worked alone, the mornings I had woken up uncertain, the years I had built a life without anyone's support. Black wasn't sadness. It was strength. It was clarity. It was self-respect distilled into fabric. I let my fingers brush over the smooth material. It reminded me of the power in choosing who you are, without waiting for permission, without asking for approval, without needing applause. Around me, the engagement hall buzzed with the rehearsed joy of celebration. But the black dress reminded me of the truth beneath the surface. Appearances could be deceiving. Success could be invisible until revealed at the right moment. Silence could carry more weight than words. I caught my sister's eyes across the room. Her smile was soft now, tentative, tinged with understanding. She finally seemed to realize that my quiet strength had always existed, waiting for the right moment to be acknowledged. Uncle James raised an eyebrow in subtle acknowledgement. My parents were still processing, still coming to terms with truths they had ignored for decades. And yet, in the calm, I realized the dress had done more than cover me. It had declared me. The black dress was not for anyone else. It was for me. A marker of resilience, a statement of independence, a signal that I no longer needed to fade into the background. I stood a little taller. My reflection in the window caught my eye, a silhouette framed by the warm glow of chandeliers. It was not the image anyone expected. Not the image they wanted. But it was mine. The guests whispered, the party continued, and yet for the first time, I felt completely at peace in their presence. I was visible, undeniable, unshaken. The girl in black had arrived. Not for them. Not for the approval of anyone in the room. For herself. And that was more than enough. The engagement party had begun as celebration. Now it felt like revelation. Every conversation, every smile, every clink of glass carried tension. The room had shifted, though the music kept playing. Everyone pretended, but nothing could hide the truth now, nor the change it brought. I stood near the center, quietly observing. My black dress absorbed attention naturally, yet I didn't seek it. It wasn't about others noticing. It was about the truth being clear, undeniable, finally seen. Uncle James leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced, eyes scanning the room. He had dropped the truth into the lap of everyone present, and now he watched the ripple effect. He had a reputation for timing. For asking the right questions. For knowing when silence was as loud as words. My parents exchanged glances across the table, faces tight with tension, guilt, pride, and uncertainty. They had underestimated the impact of one question. One truth. One quiet daughter in black who had worked while the family looked elsewhere. I noticed Lily watching me, shifting in her seat. Her smile was gone, replaced by a mixture of admiration and something unspoken, envy, maybe, or the quiet recognition that she had never faced the same obstacles I had. That's when it happened, the moment where the room fully pivoted. I spoke. Not loud. Not accusing. Just calm, measured, firm. I am here. I have always been here. And I have built my life without anyone's permission. Not because I wanted to prove something, but because I had no other choice. The words sank slowly into the room. A silence deeper than before fell. Not uncomfortable. Not fearful. But decisive. True. Uncle James gave the faintest nod. A subtle acknowledgement of approval. My parents leaned slightly forward, absorbing the reality of their decisions, their inattention, their silence. The realization that the girl they overlooked had become a woman who needed nothing from them to stand tall. Even Lily seemed different. She straightened in her chair, a small, fragile smile appearing. Understanding had replaced envy, just a little. She finally saw the strength that had always been quietly present, never celebrated, never rewarded, until now. The turning point wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't drama or shouting or spectacle. It was clarity. A moment when the story shifted, not with anger, but with undeniable truth. The girl in black had stepped fully into her own. The family, the guests, the world, they were witnesses now. And the quiet power of self-reliance, of patience, of silent determination, radiated from her like sunlight through dark clouds. From this point on, nothing would ever be the same. After the turning point, the room felt lighter, though still charged with tension. People resumed their polite conversations, glasses clinking, music humming, but the emotional undercurrent lingered like electricity in the air. Lily approached me quietly, her steps hesitant, almost unsure. For the first time that night, she seemed smaller, not weaker, but humbled, aware of the truth she had ignored for years. I need to say something, she whispered, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening too closely. Her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin. I nodded slowly, encouraging without prompting, giving her the space to speak without judgment. I was jealous, she admitted, voice barely audible. Not of your success, not really, but of the way you never needed anyone to see you to be strong. I spent so long thinking I was the favorite, the one who mattered most, but... She faltered. I waited. She drew a deep breath. But you were always, quietly remarkable, she said, finally meeting my eyes. Even when I was celebrated, even when everyone told me I was enough, I could see that you had this strength that I couldn't touch. And I hated myself a little for noticing it. Her confession was raw, unpolished, and entirely honest. It cut through years of unspoken rivalry, misunderstandings, and resentment. For a moment, it felt like a weight lifted between us. Heavy and invisible for too long. You're not weak, I said softly, placing a hand over hers. And you don't need to compare yourself to me. We each have our own path. Yours just took a different shape. Tears formed in her eyes, a mixture of relief and regret, as if admitting her envy released a burden she hadn't realized she carried. I'm sorry, she whispered again. For all the times I didn't see you, for all the moments I ignored what you were building quietly. I was wrong. I see it now. And I'm proud of you. Her hand lingered in mine for a moment longer. Not in apology alone, but in recognition, in connection, in a newfound understanding that spanned years of silence. I smiled faintly, nodding. Thank you. That means more than you know. But remember, the girl in black doesn't need anyone's approval. I'm still here, still me, regardless. Her smile softened, fragile but genuine, tinged with humility and admiration. For the first time, it wasn't a smile of rivalry or expectation. It was one of recognition and reconciliation. Behind us, the party continued, but we were no longer just sisters in a crowded room. We were allies, witnesses to the journey each of us had taken, each of us still walking toward our own truths. And in that quiet confession, in that gentle admission, a bridge was built, one that had been missing for years, connecting past resentment to present understanding. The girl in black remained strong. But now, her sister stood beside her, no longer blind to the power that had always been there. The music in the hall continued, soft and polite, but for a moment, it felt distant, like it belonged to another world. I stood quietly, observing my parents across the table, their faces etched with a mix of fear, guilt, and hesitation. My mother was the first to step forward. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes, once so controlled, were now glassy, unguarded. She swallowed hard, as if every word had to fight its way out. We were wrong, she began, voice low and shaky. We never realized, never truly saw you the way we should have. We thought we were protecting you, guiding you, but instead, we ignored what was already there. My father nodded beside her, eyes fixed on me. His jaw was tight, but I could see the unspoken remorse behind the rigid mask he tried to wear. We underestimated you, he said slowly. We let our expectations, our pride, cloud our judgment. And you didn't need us as much as we thought you did. You proved us wrong. Every step of the way. The words hung in the air, heavy but sincere. I felt a quiet shift in my chest, not relief, not anger, not triumph, but recognition. Years of silence, of neglect, of unseen struggles, had finally met acknowledgement. My mother took a hesitant step closer, reaching out as if to bridge the years of distance. I am so sorry for all the times we overlooked you, for all the moments we failed to support you when you needed it most, she whispered. I hope you can forgive us. I didn't respond immediately. Forgiveness was not about erasing the past, it was about acknowledging it, and letting it exist without letting it define me. I let the moment stretch, giving their words space to settle. Finally, I nodded slowly. I don't forget, and I don't ignore. But I see your effort to acknowledge it now. That matters. My father's shoulders slumped slightly, the tension easing. We want you to know, we are proud of you. Even if we never said it before. We see you now, fully. The sincerity in their voices was palpable, even amidst the buzzing energy of the party. The girl in black, once invisible, once overlooked, had been recognized at last. It wasn't perfection. It wasn't a sudden erasure of the past. But it was a step toward something real, a fragile, honest reconciliation that had long been overdue. I glanced at my sister, who stood nearby, her expression a mix of understanding and relief. For the first time that evening, the family felt whole, even if imperfect. And in that moment, I realized that the strength I carried, the independence, the resilience, the black dress of quiet power, wasn't diminished by their apology. It was validated by it. Because acknowledgement, when it finally comes, doesn't weaken the strong. It simply affirms that the journey, every hard step along the way, mattered. And tonight, for the first time, it did. The engagement hall felt different now. Not because the decorations had changed, or the music shifted, or the guests were any less polite. It was because the energy had transformed. The truth had been revealed. Confessions had been made. Apologies spoken. And in that space, the air felt lighter, freer, almost like the room itself was exhaling after holding its breath for decades. I stood near the center, my black dress still absorbing attention effortlessly. But this time, it wasn't a shield. It was a banner. A symbol of every struggle, every quiet victory, every step I had taken alone to build a life that was entirely mine. My sister approached me, this time with a genuine smile, one not tinted by envy, hesitation, or uncertainty. She reached for my hand. "I see you now," she said simply. "All of you. And I admire it." I squeezed her hand lightly. "Thank you," I replied softly. "And I'm proud of you too. We each have our own path." Across the table, my parents watched. Their expressions softened, more open, more real than they had been in years. Their earlier tension had dissolved into quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken aloud but is felt in every glance, every gesture. Even Uncle James leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing on his lips, eyes glinting with satisfaction. He had witnessed the unfolding truth, the small but profound transformations in the room, and his presence felt like quiet validation. The music shifted, slower now, gentler. Couples began dancing. Guests laughed a little more freely. The chatter of celebration returned, but this time, it carried warmth instead of pretense. I watched it all quietly, noticing the subtle changes. The nods of respect from friends who had underestimated me. The softened gaze of relatives who had long ignored my accomplishments. The tentative smile of my sister, now free of comparison, free of envy. I realized then that this celebration wasn't just for my sister's engagement. It was a celebration of resilience. Of truth. Of the girl in black who had walked through years of neglect, indifference, and invisibility. And had emerged stronger, undeniable, and unapologetically herself. I lifted my glass, raising it just slightly, more to myself than anyone else. The gesture didn't demand recognition. It didn't need applause. It was a quiet acknowledgement of everything I had endured, everything I had achieved, and everything I would continue to build. And as the music swelled, the guests danced, and the lights reflected on the polished floor, I felt it fully. The girl in black had arrived. Not just in the room. Not just in the family story. But in life itself. And tonight, the world could finally see her shine. The party had reached its quiet moments. Guests were saying their goodbyes, laughter softening into gentle murmurs, hugs lingering longer than usual. The night was folding in on itself, yet it felt expansive, like every word, every revelation, had stretched the walls of the room and opened something new. I lingered by the doorway, my black dress flowing softly around me, and looked back at the hall. Faces blurred, conversations faded, but the weight of the evening remained. Sharp, clear, undeniable. I thought of everything that had led me here. Every overlooked achievement, every silent struggle, every moment of doubt that had shaped me. Every lonely night when the world didn't notice. Every challenge I had turned into proof of my own strength. And now, everyone had seen. Not fully, not perfectly. But enough. Enough to acknowledge that I was no longer the invisible daughter, the background figure in their lives. I had carved a space for myself, on my own terms, and nothing could take it away. My sister came up beside me. "Thank you," she whispered softly. "For being patient, for showing me what strength really looks like." I smiled faintly, placing a hand over hers. "We're both learning," I said. "And it's never too late to start seeing each other clearly." Behind us, my parents were quietly talking, the tension between them eased, replaced by something fragile but real. Pride, understanding, regret, and love interwoven. They had apologized. they had acknowledged. And for the first time, I felt that reconciliation didn't demand surrender, it demanded recognition. Uncle James gave me a subtle nod, a quiet acknowledgement that tonight had been about more than just a party. It had been about truth. About the courage to be seen. About claiming your life without permission. I stepped outside, the cold night air brushing my face, crisp and alive. The streets were quiet now, empty, except for the glow of distant streetlights. I took a deep breath, feeling it fill every corner of me. I realized that the black dress, the house, the accomplishments, they were all symbols. Proof that no one's silence, no one's oversight, no one's doubt could define me. I had walked through it all. I had emerged unbroken. And I was ready. Ready for tomorrow. Ready for life. Ready to be the daughter, the sister, the woman I had always been, finally seen for exactly who I was, and exactly who I chose to be. The night whispered its farewell, but I didn't need it. My journey was far from over. Every step forward would carry the quiet power of the girl in black. The girl in black, once overlooked, now undeniable, turned, walked into the night, and finally felt the freedom she had earned. And in that moment, she was unstoppable.